Jonathan. It's so great to see all of you. I'm recognizing so many faces here. It's going to be hard not to just look up and say hi, like the politicians wave. I'm not going to do that. I want to make a couple of remarks before I invite our guest to join me on stage. We started talking about the reunion at the end of last year and said, you know, people come to business school for three reasons. One is the imprimatur of a great university. Second, which you've already gotten, you got your degrees. Second is because the associations that you all make with one another. And the third reason is really to learn and to be inspired. And it's for that third reason that we're met here in Bishop today. And I think as you go around and see people in your class in these black t-shirts or staff members in red ones, please thank them for all of the efforts that have gone on, weekly meetings since January to put this together. So for the next 80 minutes, what we're going to do is I'll make a couple of brief introductions. I'm not going to say much because I'm going to let Kent and John introduce themselves and ask them to each take 5 or 10 minutes and just talk a little bit about their lives, careers, philosophy of leadership, anything they'd like to talk about. And then we'll have a Q&A period that'll be organized, which means that we've collected questions from you. We've put them in categories, and I'll try to kind of group them and talk to them, just have a casual chat up here on stage. And then disorganized, which the disorganized portion are questions from the audience on anything you want to ask them. I've cleared this with them. They feel confident they can handle you. So we'll see. I will tell you one quick little story. In the Leadership Perspectives class, I've used this getting somebody like Kent. We've had Kent in twice in the Leadership Perspectives class, and I've used that as a hook to bring in other people. So when I talked to John, I said, you know, John, Kent's been in a couple of times, the leadership class. You know, you might think about that. And so this is really the dry run. He's going to be testing you to see whether or not he'll actually come in. So I'll be able to tell how this goes. We got Roger Staubach to agree this next year to come in based on the fact that we had Steve Young the year before, and we were able to hook him in. And the same thing with we think we're going to get General Myers, who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, to come in based on the fact that John Abizaid came in 2 years ago. So Kent is the hook to bring John in. We'll see how this goes. So he'll be testing you, so do your best. We asked the committee, who in the world would you like to have come? So if you could pick anybody in the world, who would you like to have? Then force rank them. And these two were at the top of the list, and we thought we're going to get a lot of no's, so we better get the invitations out. They both said yes. So what do you do with that? And we decided, let's see if we can get them both on stage at the same time. Wouldn't that be unique? When's the last time we had two CEOs from Fortune 500 companies on the same stage? It was probably testifying before the Senate. But, we were told that we'd never fill Bishop. We've filled Bishop, other than a couple of seats down here, and we have some overflow rooms. So there's been a great turnout for this. 600 people signed up to come to this. These companies represent over $15 billion in sales and 50,000 employees, a small city. And indeed, Kent goes by the title of mayor. We'll learn more about that later. So I want to show a couple of slides before we get into this. Johnny, do you have slides there? Let's put the first slide up there. So there was an interview recently with John Donahoe by the New York Times in April that was entitled, "There's No Need to Bat 900." And the quote is, all you have to do is hit one single, a couple of doubles, an occasional home run out of every 10 at bats, and you're going to be the best hitter or the best business leader around. So slide 2 then, Johnny, is based on this. This is what I've called the Thiry success constant of 0.700. And let me show you in slide 3 how this is calculated, which is basically the slugging percentage. So this is the part, you come here to learn and to be inspired. This is the learning part. So you can't go home and say, I didn't learn anything at the reunion. This is what baseball aficionados call the slugging percentage. So if you get one single times one, two doubles times two, Kent doesn't allow for any triples, so that's 0. And then if you hit a home run every 15 times at bat, which is kind of what the hitters who hit 30-plus homers a year do, good hitters do that, you end up with a slugging percentage of 700. So how many major leaguers today have a slugging percentage of 700? Just shout it out. This is Stanford. This is not that other business school. Zero. What's a really savvy crowd? I thought I'd at least get some. How about in the past, though, when you had the great players and not as good at pitching? Ballparks elaborate. How many? A couple? 3, 4? Okay, put up the fourth slide, Johnny. So here they are. This is all-time hitters. Nobody has ever hit Thiry's constant for success, ever. So he says all you have to do is, you don't have to bat 900. Well, he's talking about a 700 slugging percentage. Nobody's ever done it. So I want you to know that when I was interviewing, I used to tell people, look, if you get a hit, get a single 1 every 3 times, you'll be in the Hall of Fame. If I had the Thiry constant when I was in these shoes, he would be interviewing me rather than the other way around. So the quick introductions. John Donahoe graduated from Dartmouth in '82, went to work for Bain, interrupted his time at Bain to get an MBA here. He was rehired at Bain by Kent Thiry, and they've remained friends and mutual admirers ever since. He's since gone on to become the San Francisco managing partner, then the worldwide managing partner of Bain, 29 offices, 3,000 employees. He's now the CEO of eBay after Meg Whitman. One quick story about John that'll give you some insight, and he'll tell more about his story. But when he was dating his wife, present wife Eileen, he was busy working for Bain, and she said, "Is this really the life you want with this kind of travel, stress, pressure, and everything?" He said, "No, it's not the life I want." He wrote on the back of a Shawmut Bank receipt, "This is not a life as a consultant is not the life I want." He signed his name to it and gave it to her. She put it in his purse. So one of the questions for you is, how many times has she had to bring that out over the years? And the reason I relate to this story is because I told my wife if she would only marry me, I would learn how to dance. And 20 years later, she bought dancing lessons for us. And I said, "You know, I never told you when." To which she responded, "I knew you should have gone to law school." So John actually signed the thing and gave it to his wife. So we'll get the answer to that. But he's dealt with tough business experiences, turnarounds. And I want him to talk a little bit about how you do that. So he'll talk to us about that. One of the Business Week wrote an article when he first took over called CEO Survivor Edition, calling his first days as CEO hell there. So we'll get him to talk about that. But since hitting a low at the end of last year, the eBay stock has doubled, so we'll talk about that. Kent, he not only graduated undergraduate from Stanford, but his wife is on the board of trustees here, so he stays close to Stanford. We won't talk about his incomprehensible decision to go to that other business school. I notice Garth will not pronounce the name of that. But since he does have a 700 slugging percentage, the stock of DaVita has gone up 26-fold since he's taken on the role of CEO. A couple of quick things, just from a story standpoint. When we have him in the leadership perspective class, we constantly get the review that he is such an intentional leader. He is so focused on things. And last year, one of the comments was, "Wow, just wow." I'm going to read to you finally before we invite them on stage what a recent alum said about Kent's leadership. "I often think about him and am humbled by one of Kent's favorite quotes about leadership in life. 'This is not a dress rehearsal. This is your life.' This person goes on to say, 'As a young leader at DaVita, I've experienced that leadership development here is not just about learning how to be a good leader. It is about learning how I need to live my life, not tomorrow when I have more time or energy, but today, because my life and the lives of those I serve depends on it.'" So with that, let's welcome these two leaders up, and we'll sit over. Would you like me to move this over here? So I'm just going to ask you to stand up and talk about leadership and life and anything you want to, then we'll turn it over to John, and then we'll interview you both.
All right.
How's that?
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here, and in particular, an honor to be here with John, whom I recruited. Perhaps the best thing I ever did for Bain was to recruit him. I try to look over the fact that he then ruthlessly pushed me out on his way to the top. But this is 5 years out for a whole bunch of you. So for me, 5 years out from business school, which was that other one, was 1988. And so I was at Bain then. My wife was in venture capital, and we had just had our first baby. And so it was a time when having that first baby and being at that stage of our career where life with the new baby became 100 times more wonderful, and it became a zillion times more difficult. And it was also that stage from a career point of view that I was really trying to figure out. I'd always planned on becoming a partner and then doing a lateral transfer and going out and working in an operating company. That had always been the plan, and it was at that stage you start to think about, okay, what is the right path to do that? So that's the juncture I was at, and so I tried to think about back when I was at that time and in that place, what sort of things would have been useful for someone potentially to say to me so I wouldn't have made all the horrendous mistakes I proceeded to make over the subsequent many years. And as I talk about some of these subjects, because I'm going to try to hit quickly at life, leadership, work-life balance in 6 minutes. I speak with the full cognizance that many of you are probably better practitioners in all those categories than I am. What I have been is a very serious student of those areas, and so I bring to you the fruits of my observations, which is many of the DaVita people who are here will attest to not necessarily correspond with my behaviors. So on the life side, I think when one sits back and says, I aspire to a fulfilling and fun life, and I want that in the context of working in the for-profit sector, because it's, in some ways you can say that's easier if you take the non-for-profit path. So what is the answer? How does one lead a virtuous life? Virtuous not in the sense that you go out every day at lunch and give free meals to the homeless, although you may do that, but virtuous in a more conventional for-profit setting. How do you lead a virtuous life? Virtue defined as living in a life that's aligned with your own values, right, which are highly personalized. So there's no easy answer to that. The only answer is your own. And John and I have both had so many friends who have lost their way over time. We have a lot. I'm 54. I know a lot of people who are well-to-do and very unfulfilled at this age because they didn't reflect enough on this along the way. What was alignment for them? And two of the quotes that we use at DaVita, where we try to grow not business leaders but life leaders, one was already cited by whatever person wrote that comment, and we've used it for 10 years, that this is not a dress rehearsal, this is your life. You really don't get a do-over. Time does pass pretty quickly, and then you're as old as I am. And so you really want to lead the examined life, and it's easy to slip into a pattern where you're racing so fast you don't. The second quote is a Buddhist quote: begin with the end in mind. If you can't write down what you want your life to be like X years from now in any kind of specificity, with any kind of clarity, so that's a useful guide to making decisions, then you probably don't have enough clarity for it to guide your behaviors and decisions in fact. That some of this stuff is not obvious. There are, in fact, a lot of significant forks that one takes. The only difference is whether they're conscious or unconscious, and an awful lot of folks are in the unconscious category. That's it on life. Now on to leadership. And all of this is more to provoke rigorous questions in the Q&A session from you and Joel and others. I'll offer 5 thoughts on leadership. One is that management is a business skill. You want to get better at management, you learn more about business practices. Leadership is a human skill. If you want to get better at leadership, learn more about humans, most particularly yourself. Leadership thought number 2, just as beauty is in the eye of the beholder, leadership is in the eyes of the led. It literally does not matter one bit what kind of leader you think you are. It only matters what leader others experience you to be. And if you don't have the courage and skill to solicit that feedback, the gift of that feedback, and work on it in a transparent way, then you will never be the leader that you might think you are. Leadership thought number 3, leadership is not a function of position, it is a function of behavior. And therefore, never think that, well, once I get to be VP, once I get to be partner, once I get to be dean, once I get to be, then I'm really going to lead. But, right now, I'm sort of oppressed by the system and the norms and my boss and the rest, and so I'm going to lead then. That's not what leaders do. That's not what leaders do. Obviously, there are limits as to the impact you can have, but there are not limits as to the behavior that you can demonstrate, and the ripples effect of that at any position can be quite significant. Leadership thought number 4. A lot of stuff that gets written about leadership talks about what leaders do. The techniques, the practices, the tactics, the approaches. From my experience, leadership is much more about what you are and how people experience what you are. And any set of techniques and practices, virtually any set of techniques and practices can work based on their assessment of what you are as opposed to what you do. And the 5th And final point about leadership is that if you aspire to being a life leader, a strong business leader, in the sense of creating work environments which are more fun, fulfilling, and effective than the norm by a good margin, and then you go to places to work where leadership is valued, where it's discussed, where it's studied, where it's honored, where it's rewarded. If you want to be great at marketing, you go someplace where you're going to work for people and with people that are great at marketing. You're great at strategy, you go someplace that you're great at finance, you go someplace where they're great at it. You get a lot of people who say they want to be leaders and they go to places that don't have a leadership bone in their body, not a strand of leadership in their DNA, and they go there with that professed goal. It just doesn't make sense. Enough on leadership. Often to culture building here. If you want to build a distinctive team, a distinctive culture, whether you're running a department, a geographic area, or a company, or running some sort of not-for-profit affiliation or some political group, creating a distinctive culture, a sustainably distinctive culture, requires the same kind of strategic and operating discipline as figuring out a corporate strategy or rolling out a new product line. It takes clarity, it takes intellectual clarity, it takes clear allocation of responsibility, it takes meticulous metrics and follow-through. That's what it takes. When you hear people talk about the kind of culture they want to create, and then you ask them, well, gosh, every month, how much time do you spend on labor? Well, they go, well, it's a no-brainer. I've got reports on labor. We have monthly meetings. We have rewards tied to it. You ask them, do you track the sales of a new product rollout? Well, of course we do that. It's a dumb question. We have reports. We have meetings. We brainstorm. And you say, okay, now how do you do in tracking your culture? And whatever word you want to put on it. And they stop. I said, well, that sort of happens automatically. And we have some stuff on the walls, and every now and then we give a speech. So, well, no, that can't be. If you want to have something distinctive in an area of human behavior, which is the trickiest area of all, then you've got to be incredibly purposeful and relentless. We have a saying at DaVita that we want to be a community first and a company second, that we want to be a community that just happens to be organized in the form of a company. And of course, people in a community want their village, which is what we're called, the DaVita Village, and I'm the mayor. They want it to be economically successful. Everybody gets that. But you want to behave along the way as if you're in a community. I'll leave that one. I guess maybe one other point on that everybody at some point goes through a pretty fundamental philosophical fork in the road if you're thoughtful on some of this stuff, which is what is the means and what is the end? And this can get tricky between family and career, and what type of career, and it can get tricky within a company as to your behavior. When I ran my first company, I was regarded as a strong team builder and a strong positive culture. But for me, all of that was the means. It was sincere. It was the means, and the end was a higher stock price. My current company, it is different. It took me a year or two to realize it was different. It wasn't a conscious intellectual decision. That for me, the means and the ends had flipped. That the means was having adequate profit and shareholder return in order to support the end of creating a distinctively fulfilling and rewarding workplace for thousands of human beings. Doesn't mean I've been successful, but I'm saying that flipped. It turns out the overlap in the activities, whether the team building is the means or the community is the end, that there's a huge overlap in the activities, but there's a dramatic difference in the texture of those activities and the impact that those same behaviors have. When I think about culture building and leadership, one of the phrases now I use more and more as I get older is that intentionality rules, that people can smell your intentionality. And so you got to think a lot about what it is, whether you're giving a performance review, terminating someone, or talking to your team about what kind of culture you want to have. People smell your intentionality. Then on work-life balance, the only point I'll make here, and more stuff might come out in Q&A, is if you do not bring the same sort of analytical rigor to engineering your life as you do to engineering a factory or a cost structure or a promotional strategy, then you will almost certainly fail, because all the pressures and distractions and complexities are as intense and as numerous. And so many people get sucked into that abyss where they're working too much and experiencing too much ad hoc stress every week because they've not brought the same intellectual rigor to evaluating the engineering of their life that they have to their business problems. And then once they get married and start having kids, they can never quite catch up. In the same way, if you never organize a factory right and you're just every week racing on an ad hoc basis to meet quota, you're never going to have a great factory. And I'll close by just saying two things then. When What we believe is that if you want to lead to someplace special, it's important that you speak your dream out loud. Even knowing that when you first do it, a lot of people in the crowd will be looking at you saying that's not authentic, that's not sincere, that's not thoughtful, that's not plausible, that's not realistic, that's not what I care about. But absent the rigor of speaking it out loud, since most human beings, if they say something out loud, want to live up to it, you'll tend to climb a hill instead of a mountain. And then finally, another quote we use a lot to help guide us along the way is Buddha saying, "It is easy to be mindful, it is hard to remember to be mindful." Part of the job of a leader is to make sure that the human beings that work for him or her are as mindful as high a percentage of the time as is humanly possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
So this is a special day for me. It's special partly because it's my 50th birthday. But what is making my 50th birthday even more special is I get to be on the same stage with talking about leadership with the single leader who's had the biggest impact on my life. And Joel talked about following Kent into your classroom. Well, I followed Kent my whole career because Kent hired me at Bain. Kent was my boss for the first 3 years. Kent has been a mentor, friend, inspiration. And for those you all that work for DaVita know, he's also probably the most exceptional leader I've ever seen in terms of just hands-on leadership. So Kent, it's a wonderful way to spend my 50th birthday. Now the problem for all of you is because I have followed him, what I have to say is exactly the same. It's different words. I was sitting this morning thinking, all right, what should I say? Well, I'm going to think about things that would have been useful for me on my 5th reunion. And I'm going to do 3 things because I learned from Kent, everything's in 3s, right? Now the difference between Kent and I is Kent told you I'm going to ask questions. So I'm going to suggest 3 questions that you might want to be thinking about at this stage of your lives about leadership and about your life. The first, how do you find meaning? Reason I ask that is my experience is that the hardest thing and the most important thing is to link the activities of your life to something that gives you meaning. Now, I learned this from my leadership role models. My father was the first, and my father exuded service. He worked for Price Waterhouse, service, and a belief that the way he could give service is to bring the best out in other people. Didn't matter what he was doing, that gave him meaning. Allowed him to put his head on the pillow every night. Kent was my second role model. Kent exudes, as you guys know, building a team, taking the hill, that it's not just where you're going, but it's how you go through it, the journey you go through. And in particular, Kent loves it when there's adversity. He used to talk about it's 2nd down and 40, and we got to get to first down. And that's when he was at his best. And that gave him meaning. Third mentor for me, Tom Tierney, who Kent and I both work for. Tom exuded a belief in people's full potential and having a long-term view in mind. So I had some great role models to try to figure out, well, what gives me meaning? And there's no right or wrong answer to what gives you meaning, and only you can figure it out, because each of us is different. For me, I want to be part of building great and enduring organizations. When the book Built to Last came out by Jerry Porras, who was a wonderful professor for me here, it captured for me. And it's not only about what we accomplish, but it's with whom I accomplish it and how we accomplish it. Note some similarities from my mentor. And I've been blessed that most of my career I could link my activities, selling consulting hours, being in an internet company that's hot, that's not, that's this, that's that. Didn't matter to me because my energies I dedicated to those organizations gave me a sense of purpose and meaning. And it made the short-term success or failure a little less important in the moment. So, first question I encourage you to think about is what gives you meaning? Second, what is your life journey? And are you conscious of it? Well, here are some similarities. I was thinking this morning, 5 years out of Stanford, I was working for Kent, and I wanted to make partner at Bain. And I was impatient because I thought it was time. You remember this? We were working on Environment Fund. And I was pounding on Kent. He was a partner. When am I going to make partner? When am I going to make partner? And he says, well, you got to go talk to Tom Tierney, the guy that was running the firm. And so I go into Tom and say, Tom, it's about time I want to make partner. It's not fair. It's right. It's been 5 years. Tom, in his infinite wisdom, kind of chuckled. He said, yeah, okay, let's just set that aside for a minute, John. I want to do two things. One, here's a piece of paper. I want you to write down what you want written on your tombstone. I thought, what? I want here to talk about partner. No. He said, we'll talk about it at the end. So I write down what I want on my tombstone. He said, great. He said, how old are you? I said, 30. I think I was 30 or 29, I can't. He said, how long do you want to be actively engaged in the world? I said, till I'm 75. He said, great, so you've only got 45 more years. Then he wrote a piece of paper and he put 75 through 65, 65 through 55, 55 through 45, 45 through 35. And he said, how old are your kids? I had 2 at the time, I have 4 now. And I wrote out, he said, this is where your kids are going to be in high school. This is when they go off to college. Here's where you and your wife are going to be empty nesters. Here's where you're going to have intense periods of family. He said, what's your wife? What's her career ambitions and where does that fit? He said, what's your family situation? Who are your friends? And he mapped it out. He said, my real question for you is, given you've got only 45 years left in your career, what do you want to accomplish each decade that moves you towards your tombstone? And so we go in a conversation around that. And all of a sudden, at the end of that conversation, whether I got promoted to partner in the next month didn't seem quite so important. And so having intentionality, as Kent called it, about your own life's journey. And again, there's no right or wrong answer for a life's journey. It's only yours. The hard part is figuring it out. Third question, how will you keep learning? My mode for learning changed right about when I was in your stage. And actually, Kent's involved in this story as well. 5 years out of business school. Because I had, in college and in business school, I had this image that the way I wanted to learn is I wanted to find this Yoda-like mentor. I would sit at their knees and just absorb the wisdom, right? Just learn. And they would teach me about everything, about business, about life, about leadership. And Kent was one of those early figures for me, as was Tom Tierney. As were my father or a few Stanford professors. And right about 5 years in, working for Kent, I started realizing that actually I was a little better than he was at some things. and that I was a little better than Tom Tierney at some things. Not at everything, but at some things. So all of a sudden I said, well, who am I going to learn from? Because I've got to find someone that's better at everything. And what I began to realize is actually no, at some point in your career, there's no one that's better at everything. Probably, and I guarantee you, you're there. And so I had to change my mode of learning from learning a lot from one person to learning a little from a lot of people. And it has completely changed my orientation around learning. I learn something from every interaction I have with someone. Because everybody's good at something. In fact, I've trained my mind that I go in any meeting and I walk out and I have this hilariously recurring experience where I'll walk out of a meeting at eBay with, we're negotiating some deal and our CFO will say, God, they were such assholes. And I said, well, no, I thought he was really good at this and I thought this guy was really good at that. Because I look for what they're good at because what I can learn from. And I'm constantly learning as a result. And so my question for you is how are you going to keep learning throughout not just the next 5 to 10 years, but the next 25 years and have intentionality around it? So, in any event, we almost said the same thing. So I'll ask you to consider those 3 questions and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you. So we could almost adjourn the meeting here. We could certainly turn it over to questions here, but a couple of things. I've heard Kent talk about, how leadership is learned, and yet when you and I were sitting there talking and watching him, we had this conversation about how he's such a natural. He is a charismatic leader. It's just, can leadership be learned? Have you learned leadership? Are you able to train leaders? Are you able to take raw clay and mold it? Should everybody in here think they have leadership ability, or are some people naturals?
Well, let me be clear about one thing. Kent's a natural leader, but he had to learn a lot, and I was one of his betas. and the reality is Kent cared. Kent was not the easiest guy to work for. He was a charismatic leader, but he was a pain in the ass, right? You were. Well, no, you've got
Still am.
But what part of what makes even a natural leader like Kent has to really, really work at it. And I think that's, if there's one common thread about good leaders, is they never quit learning. They never quit wanting to get better. And so, I think the term natural leader is a little overused, because we get to deal with a lot of CEOs now, or world leaders, or political leaders. And to me, one of the common denominators, charisma actually sort of maybe makes a difference on TV for the politicians, but I think in business, what makes the best leaders are the ones that never quit wanting to learn.
Yeah.
And their personalities are as different as can be. So I don't know if you can teach it, but I do know it can be learned.
So Kent, Kent is known to dress up in Three Musketeers gear and get out and play the mayor role, and I mean he has a lot of fun. As you've watched your buddy at eBay actually be booed in meetings and he has had a tough row to hoe. I mean, Bear Stearns was on the rocks at the time he took over, one of the toughest environments. He's really had a tough thing. What advice would you give him, or what have you seen him do that?
Yeah, I think I did talk with, when John stepped into eBay, it was a very difficult situation on a number of levels, including the fact that he hadn't been out of Bain and at eBay that long, so a lot of domain knowledge and networking relationships within your own institution. He didn't have the benefit of that, in addition to the fact that business was going south and it was highly, highly visible, and a lot of people were losing a lot of money. So we talked every now and then, and I think I gave no useful advice, but was heartened by the fact that this is when you find out who a leader is, really. It is easy to lead when things are going well. It's easy to behave well when things are going well. It is hard. Now, but for a leader, the beautiful thing is when things are lousy, everybody's paying attention to you. All right, so the metaphor I use, it's the equivalent of the Super Bowl commercials cost $2 million for 30 seconds or some most expensive. Why? Because everybody's watching and listening. That's why it's so expensive. A crisis like he inherited, the bad thing is it's a crisis. The good news is everybody's listening and watching. And so if you're going to demonstrate important stuff, whatever that is, you're going to move more minds and have more people think and feel a certain way than you will ever get the opportunity again, because they will not be listening so much again. And I think this is what he got and did. You couldn't guarantee what the business outcome was going to be, but within the context of whatever that business outcome was going to be, it was going to be a healthier organization. And in the end, the greatest gift a leader gives to their organization is to make it sustainably healthy.
And what were you thinking as you were going? Would you consider that the toughest thing that you dealt with in life, or was this just another business challenge, or what was your mindset? Because a lot of these people are entering stages where they're starting to deal with some of these real P&L personnel. They're leading teams. I saw the resumes of a lot of these folks, and they're at that stage. Well, you've just been through a crucible here. What was was this a major life setback for you? Was it, and how did you think about it?
I mean, I'll go back to what I said earlier. One of the things I learned from Kent is it's in the periods of adversity that you can get the most done. So it wasn't easy. In fact, Laura Peel's out here somewhere. She was my chief of staff at the time, and she remembers she was in those rooms at times when, I had hate videos about me on YouTube. literally, where there, I went on, we were at an eBay Live, where we had 15,000 angry community members, and I go on, and I hear one of them accosted one of our employees, and it was on YouTube, so I go on YouTube, and I put in eBay, and the first video is what John Donahoe is doing to eBay, and I click it on, and it had over 100,000 views. I click it on, and it's scenes from Schindler's List, where the German, and they put Donahoe, is shooting the Jew, and they put eBay community member. So I can't tell you that it was easy, and Laura can attest to that. What I can tell you is I had some sense and some experience, frankly. All my leadership opportunities, I took over the Bain San Francisco office when the firm was bankrupt. I took over Bain, and it was in the dot-com crash. So I'd had some experience about early in your leadership tenure having crisis and understanding that crisis is an opportunity. And but I think the hardest thing is just having the fortitude to stay with it, and to have to not wish it were better, but to recognize for what it is, and take advantage of the adversity. You can drive more change in tough times.
You're somewhat known for having taken time off from Bain, to be with family and to deal with sort of first things first. Did that help you? Has that experience contributed to your ability to get through, or was it just such a different experience than your eBay experience that it wasn't relevant to that? I mean, I want you to kind of explore this this time off with family, and because you've set priorities in a way that is probably known by most of the people in the room here, where you left to.
Well, I got married at a young age, and I was married when I came to Stanford. And actually, we had our first child was born the first day of first term finals. So it was a really transformative experience for me, because I showed up with an excuse of why I didn't have to do well. And that first term, you remember first term, first year, everyone's freaking out. And I'm like, I'm having a baby. It doesn't really matter. I don't have to do well. And, I took that pressure off myself, and I actually enjoyed it. And sure enough, Jack, my son, who's now 25, was born the first term. Maureen McNichols was my first final. And we had a baby that night. And I was relaxed that week. I got 5 H's. I don't know if they still grade the same way. That fall term. It was bizarre. And what it taught me was a little perspective. Your family can give you perspective that actually contributes to your effectiveness as a leader. You talked about the same thing as well, about how the things outside of leadership, my family, my kids, family crises, family experiences, without a doubt have been some of the biggest contributors to my effectiveness as a leader.
I want to know how many times Eileen had to pull out that Shamit Bank receipt and remind you of that.
It's in tatters because she's pulled it out so many times.
So Kent, would you just share an example of a tough choice you've had to make as a leader, and how you've gone about it and implemented it, and just reflect on something that's been a tough call for you?
Well, I think typically the toughest ones. Well, I'll change my example. I was going to talk about terminating people that you like, but I'll switch to a different one. A few years ago, we did a $3.1 billion acquisition of a competitor in our same space. And so there was lots of overlap. We do dialysis centers. It's when your kidney doesn't work. And so there's lots of overlap, and the FTC was going to insist that we divest some. And because we had were regarded as having a very tight culture, the DaVita Village, the teammates and citizens of the village, the assumption, unspoken assumption among virtually all DaVita people, was that we would never divest one of our native centers. We would only divest from the company that we were acquiring. And and that's in fact what a majority of the executives voted, and I overruled that and divested some of our centers with people who loved DaVita entirely, and thought they had been a part of turning around the company, because it was a mess when we first arrived. They felt that I had absolutely violated this social contract. And going in front of those people And the other people who were not divested, and explaining why I did that was brutal. I mean, just having adults come up, some angry, saying very painful things, some just crying and crying. And the worst ones actually were the ones who said, I understand why you have to do this, but I'm so sad, and crying and crying. And knowing that you were changing their lives, and the company that they were going with was not going to be the same as the company that I was kicking them out of.
Which is a lot of what you've heard at eBay.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, driving necessary yet painful change is one of the hardest things a leader does.
And so what's your self-talk when you do something like that? You know you're doing the right thing, or at least you, according to every analysis you've done, and your head and your heart tell you you've got to do it, but it's still brutal. I'll
tell you what I told the people. We use the metaphor, we're a community first and a company second. We use that for making decisions. And we use our mission statement for making decisions. And I sat with people, and so if it was you, I'd be saying, there'll come a day when you say you're not going to work at DaVita anymore because you're retiring, or because your spouse is transferred, or because you get a great opportunity, maybe even at a competitor. And so you're going to say to me, KT, I've loved DaVita, I've learned so much here, but it's right for me to go. For my family's life, for my spouse's life, for my life, it's time for me not to work at DaVita anymore. It's been great. Similarly, therefore, most of life in areas like this needs to be symmetrical. We cannot make a lifetime commitment to an individual because they can't do it for us. And my job is to secure the long-term viability of the village. And therefore, in order to keep the village as strong as possible for the most people, therefore, I must make this decision, which is very bad for you. Just like you leaving me when you're the best facility administrator we've ever had, and with you leaving that center, a lot of the patients are going to go and the doctors are going to switch. That's bad for us, but we wish you the best because you're making an honorable decision consistent with your values. And so it was one of those cases where had we not had the foundation of the real metaphor and of the values we believed in, there's no way it could have been persuasive, because it would have been just a capitalistic decision.
Yeah. Is that a metaphor you used, or the similar thought? Or how did you go about it?
Joel, those are the loneliest moments, right? And those are the moments where the head is your enemy, and you have to trust your intuition and your instinct. And to some extent, I would view where all of you are, think of the next 10, 15, 20 years as learning laboratories to build and grow your intuition, your emotional intelligence, your instincts, your judgment. Because in those moments, you can't ask, you've got to go inside, and you've got to say, what do I think's right? And I have to believe in it, even in the face of what can be a lot of negative feedback. And you can go ask your friends or counselors or board for advice, but at the end of the day, the job of the leader is to make that decision. And the hard decisions are the ones that are in the face of adversity. And so I, and there's always a little doubt there. As a leader, you can't always show the doubt. You've got to say, this is what we're going to do, and this is where we're going. But I think one of the most important things you can do in your career is build your judgment, build your instincts, and that doesn't just come from business; it comes from life, because you'll be called upon relying on those. I mean, Laura knows that there were tough times. We were going to say, we're going to lay off 10% of the company. Never been laid off before. That was, if I'd have wavered one bit, we wouldn't have done it. Everyone else wanted to find a way out, and those are lonely moments.
So is this group in here, you said take the next 10, 15 years, develop yourself, develop emotional intelligence, ability to lead people, study leadership, et cetera. If you project forward 15 years for you guys, the next chapter in your life, I sense that you both enjoy being CEOs now. Even though you've been in CEO hell, it's still a job you like and enjoy.
Yeah,
and
let's be clear, it moved out of hell about 15 months ago, so it's gotten a little better.
So you're both liking the job.
Clear?
You're liking the job now.
Oh, I love my job.
So 15 years from now, what's the next chapter? Whatever it is, I don't know how long, but the next chapter in your life, have you given much thought? I mean, Kent is an intentional guy. You've kind of you've had a career path. What's the next job? You're both young. Yeah, I say young. At my age, you're really young.
I think we'd be working together.
I mean, as long as I'm not working for you.
No, he's never
It doesn't sound like he's going to work for you.
Because revenge would be too sweet for him. And it's,
So let me ask one. Go ahead.
You know, for me, it's again the three principles. How do we build? How can I be part of building something that's special and enduring? Doing it with people that I want to be doing it with, and in a way where how we do it is as important as what we're doing. And I think at that stage in my life, it's going to be more about who I'm doing things with, and then picking out the world problems that we're applying our energies toward.
and I don't even mean to duck the answer. For me, I'm sort of rewording my own life little mission statement, and for me, when I stop doing this, I would like to be very involved in a not-for-profit cause of some sort, where working on it is team-oriented, because that's what I love, where there's significant controversy around it. So it's a battle. It's a full-contact sport, not a game of checkers, and where whether we succeed or fail, everybody will, at the end, say they're really glad they were in that fight. Those are my 4 criteria with what comes next for me.
Joel, you mentioned on the way in you're good friends with Mitt Romney. And if there was ever a business leader that should be a political leader, it's Kent Thiry. So anyone that's from Colorado, I think he should be the next governor and
Well, I was just going to
future
say, meet the
president.
46th president of the
Yes,
United States.
amen.
Here.
Amen.
So last question from me, and then we're going to open up the last 20 minutes or so to the audience to ask whatever questions you'd like. I think we have mics here, but if you each had a mulligan, if you had a do-over, and I'm assuming you haven't done everything exactly as you'd want. If you had a do-over, what would it be? What would you like to take another shot at? Obviously not your first quarter of your first year at the GSB. Anybody'd love to have those grades.
It was a lot easier back then.
And it was Stanford too,
I was
right?
going to say, 62 requirements, Garth. I don't think we had 62 over 2 years. 62 credits.
It was a lot tougher on the East Coast, right, Kent?
Yeah.
Well, I won't compare my first term grades.
Yeah.
Where your mind goes quickly is those things that didn't go well, and when I'm caught, and I can't give you a good answer because I now realize what I would not have realized then, that the stuff that went really poorly helped me grow in ways where I don't think some of the good stuff that's happened would have ever happened. And so if I was maybe right before that moment, I still wouldn't pick to do it again. I can't say that, but I actually don't. I worry that if some of those really bad experiences had not happened, my life wouldn't be as healthy now. So I don't have a good answer.
There's a quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson that says, "When it's darkest, men see the stars." And so I've often thought that adversity, is really a great teacher. You wouldn't wish it on yourself, but you wouldn't want to have missed it either.
It's the best teacher.
Yeah.
I mean, somewhat similarly, it's when I didn't trust my instincts or I was afraid of failure or afraid of the consequence. So when I first got to eBay, it was before I was CEO, I came in and was like, I think we need to change some things here. Everyone's, no, you don't understand, you don't understand, you don't understand. And I put my instincts on the side for a couple of years and just said, I must not understand, I want to keep learning. And in hindsight, I was not trusting my instincts, and I was afraid of the consequence of coming in that environment, causing disruption, making change and failing. And by the time I got to CEO, we had to do it. It was so obvious. But and it's so fear of failure for me would be trusting my instincts and not be afraid to fail.
So I've got a number of other questions. Several of them revolve around this issue of, here's a couple of consultants. Actually, did consulting before business school and after business school, came up through the ranks, and then have ended up as CEOs. I know a lot of you are currently consulting, have been consultants, et cetera. So there may be a number of questions around that, but I want you to feel free to ask any questions. And so do we have the mics and the setup for that? And just raise your hand, and we'll pass the mics in to you. We've got a hand here in the middle, if we can pass that down.
Hi, I'm Fernando, class of 2005. Just had a question regarding the points that you both made about starting at the end or the tombstone. And when you were talking about that, I couldn't help reminding the speech that we had in our graduation by Steve Jobs, when he talked about connecting the dots and how sometimes you just have to make a decision that doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense, but it feels that it's right. And then only afterwards, looking back, you can sort of connect the dots and have a story that sort of makes more sense to you. How do you deal with this? Do you ever have had to make a decision that felt right, but doesn't necessarily seemed like a step towards the goal that you just felt like it was the right thing to do, but it doesn't necessarily move you towards what you're aiming for?
I'll take one stab at it. Back when I first came to DaVita, it was a company where it's lost 90% of its market value, was functionally bankrupt, being investigated by the SEC, sued by shareholders. Most of the executives have been fired or quit because of all the above, and so while there was a lot of reasons not to do it, what felt right was to say right from the beginning, we're going to try to create a special place, and used words around team and creating the greatest dialysis company the world has ever seen. So that felt right, but there were a lot of reasons why analytically one could argue it wasn't the right time, because you knew that a lot of people were going to say, how stupid to talk about that when we might not make payroll. How stupid to talk about that when most of us think you're going to fix this and spin it and sell it and make a lot of money and leave. And so I knew that the group was going to be like this, and about 20% were going to react positively, and the other 80% were going to be quite negative, some vehemently negative. And so I wrestled with that intensely over 6 months as that played out 2 or 3 times a week in different settings, until enough people crossed the philosophical bridge and decided that they were going to try for the same thing. And so that was one of those cases where it just sort of felt right, and I was at a stage in life where I said, this is which I might not have had the courage to do when I was younger, that I'm going to do it. And then only later did it start to come together, because it wasn't like you could lay out an entire work plan. Only later could you connect the dots that came from stumbling in the direction that felt spiritually correct.
I remember that decision when you decided to go to DaVita. That was well, I thought you were going to mention that when he had toughest decisions.
It almost cost me my marriage. So
it was.
But don't we all struggle with intuition, versus analysis? I mean, here you're learning analysis, but you really do have an intuition about some things, and it's getting to the point where you can trust that. So
Absolutely.
Back to the audience here, hands.
Hi, I have a question that both of you referred to somewhat obliquely. For those of us who are maybe 10 years rather than 5 years out and in a dual working family, can you talk a little bit about how you and your partners have navigated that through time, and how that stage of life where you are now, what might you have been thinking about 10 years out in that regard?
We share one thing. We both married women who are a lot smarter, better looking, and more talented. I'll tell you how we've done it, and then you can do the same. I went to college with my wife. We both went to Dartmouth. She's a peer. She's a partner. We came here to Stanford. I started business school. We had our first kid. She started law school the next fall. I went to the dean at the time, Bob Jedicke, who said I could go part-time in my second year of business school, which didn't turn out to be necessary, but again, mentally, I was going part-time because we lived over in Escondido Village for 5 years while she finished her degree. She got done with law school, clerk for a federal judge. I walked into Kent and Tom Tierney, said, I got to quit Bain. You remember this, first year Fireman's Fund as a client. They said, what are you talking about? I said, I've got to drive my kids to school every morning because my wife has to be in the judge's chambers at 7:30 in the morning, so I cannot travel one day. I've got to be there every single day. They said, fine, you can go part-time. What are you crazy? You can go part-time. So I worked part-time for a year while Eileen was clerking for a judge in San Francisco, and we had 2 young kids. Ironically, the client loved it, and it worked out well. We were dual career for a number of years until we had our 3rd and 4th children, at which point she stopped working and did a PhD. I did a sabbatical there at one point and did a sabbatical for 3 months. Today she's a U.S. ambassador to Human Rights Council based in Geneva. And we have 2 kids out of college and 2 at home. So, and it's been a partnership and a journey. It's been a constant dialogue and a constant effort where we both had certain things we cared about. It's the intentionality point Kent talked about personal life. And there were many times where, on paper, what we were trying to do wouldn't have made sense, but we had a shared commitment toward our children, a shared commitment toward our family. I remember one of the, it just occurred to me, after we had our 3rd and 4th kids, I canceled our social life. Yes. You remember that?
Yes.
And we literally, we told everybody we're canceling our social life for a few years because we didn't want our friends to feel bad that we were always going to say no, because we were going to say, you know what, our careers and our family is all we can handle right now. It's been a journey. It's been an enormously rewarding journey. There's never been a right or wrong answer, and we've had to work at it every day. And we work at it with our kids now.
When do you get your social life back?
You know, what happens is your kids provide your social life. My social life standing on the sides of basketball courts or water polo. I mean, 95% of my social life's around my kids or the parents of my kids' friends. So it comes back in, but just in a different form.
Yeah, if I can add a few points, because it's such an incredibly important question. First, by way of context, so my wife and I met first year of business school at Harvard, and she went into venture capital. I went to Bain. She became one of the first female venture capital partners in America, and this is back in the days when literally we delayed getting pregnant the first time until she was promoted because we were worried if she got pregnant first, there would be no promotion. So it was a very intense set of compromises, and you end up kind of take it 1 year or one chunk at a time. It just has to be that way. Once we had our 2nd child, she stopped working. She went from full to part to then not. She now sits on the board of 3 large public companies, Medtronic and US Air and Calpine, and a number of not-for-profit boards, and served 15 years in the Stanford Board of Trustees, and ended up with this life which she actually prefers to had she stayed full-time in venture capital as a mommy, as a person, as a citizen. But at the time, we were both petrified because it felt like she was going off a cliff into some sort of professional abyss versus what she was doing as a high-profile venture capital partner. And we stole the idea. John told me of this idea about what we call a social moratorium. And we did the same math. We used to go out one night a week with friends, maybe 2 nights every 3rd week, so 1.3 nights a week. And when you cancel
That's Kent, right?
And when you cancel that, it's an amazing surge in high-quality weekend time with your kids. And so we went 15 years. We're empty nesters. We just became empty nesters. And Denise and I are going, well, did you actually call people and invite them? Because long ago we stopped being invited. And so we're getting back into it. But we had to customize things that when I took over DaVita, my wife said, well, we're not going to move to LA, and the company was headquartered down there. Kids are happy here, my parents are here, so much of my boards are here. So I was going to commute. in San Francisco and LA. And it's kind of, my God, we said, okay, let's go ahead and try it. And if it fails, I'll find a successor and no harm done for a year or two. And we found two things out that were important. Well, first, what happened very shortly, because I was forced to, because I so much wanted to be home, I started working 2 days a week at home. And then only being down in LA 2 nights a week, which was less than I traveled at Bain. And so you would have never thought of that. But once you're in the situation, just like going part-time and doing these other things, if you sit down and say, okay, we got to solve for something, let's try a bold experiment. At the worst, since I really love this job, the worst that can happen is they tell me, okay, you're at home too much, you're fired. But they didn't. And so I got to have it all, because I was there when they went to school. I was there when they got home, and the 2 nights I was down there, I got to work 17 hours a day, get amazing things done, take people out to dinner. But I never would have had that idea had we given up and not gone for it. And the final thing I'll say in this subject, because it's so important, is we made a deal early on in our marriage. It's going to sound really trite to some of you, that no matter how mad we were, before we went to sleep, we would kiss each other and say that we loved each other. And there were times when we almost, spat out the words. My wife would kiss you, she'd kiss me and say, "I love you, you asshole." But it's still, if you end that way, it's really good for the next morning.
Back to the couple of questions.
Everybody in the middle.
Looks like we got Mike.
Can we get the mics moving?
We got one right there, it looks
Okay.
like.
Go.
Yeah, hi, Dave from class of 2009. You guys both spoke to the importance of experiential learning, and I'm just wondering if you have any tricks that you can share with us for how to find time to think and reflect and kind of organize all the data points that you get each day, each week, each month, and each year.
You got to make it. No one's going to give it to you. No one's going to give it to you. So, in my case, I use early morning, because that's the time I'm most reflective and least tired. And, whether it's prayer, whether it's reflection, whether it's journaling. I think you might have started me on journaling. I'm not an obsessive journaler, but if I go a month and I haven't written out kind of what's going on for a couple days, that's a sign that I really need it. And so the other thing I'll say, and I think we both share this, is, and I learned this at Stanford, we were talking about this, I think one of the best courses I took at Stanford was a leadership course Jim March took, and we read War and Peace, Othello, Anna Karenina, and I forget what the fourth was. Don Quixote, yes, Don Quixote. Talk about. I've tilted at windmills many times in my career. Some of the best leadership learning I've done has been reading what are characterized religious books by Jesuits, by Buddhists, and so the more you go along in life, including on some of the life balance issues, looking outside what might be a business tradition can often be the greatest source of reflection and learning. And
what I would add, although it's largely redundant, there's a Buddhist quote, "One cannot pour from an empty cup." And so you must discover for you what ways to keep your cup full, your family's cup full, and the people that work with you, their cups full. And for me, I do personal journaling, typically once a week. And I have to keep track, because if I don't keep track of whether I'm doing it or not, I sometimes will slip for a few weeks. And I've got 6 categories: right body, right thought, right family, right friends, right work, and right plan. And I just find I can't lie to myself as much if I just have to write 2 sentences about the week. If I'm just talking glibly to myself while I'm driving or getting dressed, I can convince myself, a little,
I mean, you can bullshit yourself as well as you bullshit everyone else.
Yeah. Yes. And so that really works. I'm much more honest with myself when I see myself writing a sentence on a piece of paper about how I behaved that week. And then also I try to make sure that a couple times a year I get 24 hours totally by myself in a quiet place. I backpack, often be in a tent, or we have a little cabin in the mountains, go up, but just be totally with myself for a long time to kind of work my way through whatever conventional wisdoms I've developed about my life. And that just, for me, takes a certain amount of quiet time without conventional interruption.
Your friends can be a big help as well on that. So Kent and I worked intensely together for, probably 6, 7, 8 years. And now we see each other 3 times a year, 4 times a year. But within 2 minutes of seeing each other, he's asking me, you doing any prayer? You doing any journaling? What's going on in your, and the question's not how are your kids doing in basketball? And we hold each other accountable in that way, or there's a, and when we get together, I know, shit, I better have thought about something because he's going to be probing about what's going on. And so our friendship, that's one of the extraordinary things about our friendship, is we can not have seen each other in 6 months, and it takes 2 minutes and we're in at that level. So reach out to your friends and ask them to help you be accountable in that way.
And if I can add one other thing on this, this is where it becomes so important to be in a company or an organization which is relatively aligned with how you want to live your life. And it doesn't mean not-for-profit. It means the way in which people interact with each other. Because for some people, they have work that drains so much out of their cup every week, it's really hard to refill it. If you're in a place where, again, you can have 2 companies in the same industry, one can be in a place where people interact with each other and care about each other and do things for the community as a company and do things for each other, and there's a sense of shared values and shared commitment, all within the real world of budgets and capitalistic preferences. And that same job with the same financial performance is far less draining of your cup. So I submit that's where this, I was worried when people talk about their professional and their personal lives. I say if those are 2 separate, then there's probably something wrong with your professional life.
So let's take one more question from the audience, and I've got a final question. We'll wrap up here on time, but one last question out here from the audience. And
Julian? Okay. Perfect.
go for it.
I'm going to seize the initiative. Julian, class of 05. I'm interested, I often hear that it's very difficult for consultants to transition into a line management role, and particularly into a CEO role. You've both achieved that with spectacular success. I'm curious to know whether you'd have achieved that anyway, or whether there are particular things you've taken from consulting that have made you successful CEOs today.
I want to go first. Sure. We talked about this briefly earlier. So I left Bain at 35, became president of a public company, and had the CEO and chairman not been a very wise, gentle, supportive, kind man, I would have been fired in the first year or so, because I was trying to drive too much change. I was too sure I was right, and so I screwed it up pretty badly and got saved by playing in the right arena, not by playing well. My experience, having said that, I love a lot of the skills that Bain Consulting gave me that have helped me be a better executive. But when I first made the transition, I had certain muscles which were very overdeveloped and other muscles which were very underdeveloped, and they were equal problems. And what I did wrong, despite all that consulting teaches you about listening and facilitating, is once I stepped into an operating leadership role, I was too intent on proving how much value I could add, as opposed to proving how much I respected and would listen to other people. There's an old saying, they don't care how much you know till they know how much you care. Well, I was way too intent on demonstrating how much I knew and how much value I could add and what should be different, as opposed to demonstrating that I respected them, cared for them, and together we could do great things. So I screwed it up pretty badly.
I screwed it up worse. You know, I think what's probably similar is we both knew we wanted to be leaders. I think it has far more to do about you and what is in your purview and ambition. And then, you know, coming to Stanford was a place I took advantage of the leadership resources. The Jim March course, the touchy-feely, the creativity course, the Hal Levitt was around then and took a great course. Bain was a vehicle for me to learn a lot about leadership. And I ended up running an office as a first-year partner and running the firm at 38, 39 years old and getting a lot of good experience. And coming to eBay, I've learned a lot about leadership. So I'd be really careful about the label consultant or not consultant. It's sort of like the label Stanford or Harvard. You know, many of you could have gone to either place. It's much more a question of what you make of the experience. And if you want to run something, consulting firm's a great place to learn some good skills. It needs to shape what kinds of things you tend to work on, how you get involved. Just as I was hearing about the DaVita Redwood program, which is a program Kent's put in place that sounds phenomenal, where I guess now over 50 Harvard and Stanford MBAs have joined DaVita in a leadership track that helps develop Stanford and Harvard MBAs in line environments to grow their leadership skills. The program's just a vehicle. The people is what take advantage of it, or they don't. And so I wouldn't let anyone tell you that, oh, you're a consultant, you can't run something. That's bullshit. Any more than someone that works at GE can necessarily run something well after 5 years. It has much more to do about the individual and your mindset and your attitude. And if that's something you want to do, find environments where you can learn and make sure you learn.
So here's the last question. Kent, if it's your 50th birthday, where would you want to go and what would you want to do if you could go anywhere on your 50th birthday? Where would you like to be?
Well, that was 4 years ago,
Can you remember back that
so
far?
I can tell you what we did, which was, because it was a special, like any anniversary, like a reunion. These are society's vehicles for forcing reflection. That's why tribes, villages, societies have holidays and other rituals. It's to provoke reflection, and so it did for us. And what I chose to do, which we worked out beautifully, is we took 3.5 weeks off in the summer. I did virtually zero work. We took my parents and my wife's parents, my children, and all of my siblings that could go to Europe. For many of them, it was their first time, probably the only time in their life they get to go. For our parents, we knew it would be their last time, and we have lost one of them since then. And we did part of it as the full tribe in Italy, renting a big home and doing glorious things. Part of it just as a nuclear family, myself and my children in a little barge, and then my wife and I with the finish. And it was just 25 days of sort of celebration of family tribe. It was glorious, and the family still talks about it as one of those special times, because many folks in our family couldn't afford it, so we funded the whole thing.
So John, it is your 50th birthday. Where would you most like to be?
He's going home to take care. He's going home to take care of the kids. His mommy's in Geneva.
It's true. You know, this is going to be a little bit, I'm going to go low before we end high, but there's a message in it. So first of all, being here with Kent means a lot to me. If I were to think about a sense of purpose and meaning and people that mean a lot to my life, I can't think of a better way. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go pick up my son and get him to a basketball tournament. That's a great thing. And then a tragedy happened in my broader ecosystem earlier this week. Some very good friends we grew up with, their third child, or our kids grew up with, their third child was a sophomore at University of Santa Cruz. And at 3 a.m. on Saturday night, he slipped off a skateboard, hit his head, and died, brain dead. And so I'm going to the memorial tonight, and I'll be an usher. And it is a really heavy thing as a parent. The 3 a.m. phone call is the thing, as we all know, is what you just dread, and especially when they don't live at home, because, and yet I know in the pain and in the suffering, there will be such a sense of community and communion and connection to what life's really about. That it's not a celebration, although they're calling it a celebration of his of his life through his death. But those kinds of experiences, if I had that versus going to a party, it's not even close. I'm horrified it happened, but I'm not afraid of going. In fact, I embrace it because I think the painful moments in life are some of the best. Both as a leader, we talked about adversity, and then personally. So,
Well, let me
I didn't mean a downer, but all I can tell you is, as you go on in life, crisis happens. It happens to yourself, happens to your family, happens to your kids, and I think one of the things we learn to do is embrace it, because there's so much that comes out of it, and it makes you a better person and a better leader too.
Well, let me just say on behalf of all of those here that we're so glad that you were willing to spend part of your 50th birthday with us here, and we want to wish you a happy birthday. So I think where is Beth? I think we've got Beth Benjamin somewhere.
Is someone going to pop out of a cake somewhere?
I think so.
Wait, if I can just say, you now see
Stall for us.
after this session. After this session,
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear John. Happy birthday to you.
When you become 50, I can't even see the cake without these.
Joe, I can just say one sentence?
I just want to say you can now see, after experiencing Donahoe for 90 minutes, why I knew I had to leave Bain, because my fragile ego couldn't deal with the fact that I knew he was going to rocket past me. And so I got off that highway onto a country road.
And just to get the last word in, John does have to leave, so if we could all just let him have a clear path out. I think Kent can hang around a little bit, and then we'll let everybody leave, and in 15 minutes, will any of you who'd like to talk about what we've just talked about here, feel free to gather up here at the front, and I'll conduct a little bit of a discussion. I think it's here, isn't it, Beth? It's here in this room. So with that, let's let John go.
Enjoy your reunion, everybody.